Angelicus and its equations here. Sperb.
Welcome to the 45th episode of Sperб's Herbs. Today we're going to be talking about a very interesting herb, one that I've been fascinated about because I'm kind of aware of the historical significance of it. Zhu Sha, which is Cinnabaris or Cinnabar. Cinnabaris is the Latin and Cinnabar is the English. And this is fascinating, also known as mercury sulfide, as we're going to find out. So this mercury, which has been used for centuries for lots of different things and have been very medicinal and toxic. And so we're going to talk about all those aspects of this. So this is going to be a fascinating episode. So let's talk some more about today's episode. Today we're going to be looking at another Chinese herb, Zhu Sha or Cinnabar. Historically, this quote-unquote herb is extremely important to Chinese and Taoist development and Chinese alchemy. And the real question for our modern audience is it safe? As usual, we will be exploring something a little different. Today, we will introduce that Taoist alchemy and talk a bit about that. But before we do, I wanted to talk about, boy, we have a deal for you today. We have spent years preparing our How to Understand Drugs as an Herbalist series, and it is finally complete, and we are celebrating with the biggest deal we have ever offered. You get our complete 45-hour course with CEUs and a lovely frameable certificate of completion for half off. But we're including so much more than just that. We will throw in a signed copy of my book. That alone is worth over $80. Integrative pharmacology, combining modern pharmacology with integrative medicine. That's combining modern pharmacology with integrative medicine. It is a textbook. It's a big book. It ain't no joke. Plus, you will get an additional 2-hour course. I think one of our most important courses, interpreting Chinese medical research for free. That'll help you with some of the steps we talk about when we're talking about drug-herb interactions. And that is still not all. We'll give not 1, but 2 hours more of any course you want on our website. This is 49 hours of courses and continuing education, a free signed book, a lovely certificate. That's a value of $809.95 worth of amazing products, and all for just $337.50. Just go to www.integrativemedicinecouncil.org/megadeal. That's MEGADEAL, megadeal, and get your discount right now. So that's www.integrativemedicinecouncil.org/megadeal. But please hurry. This is a limited time offer. All right, so let's talk about alchemy for just a few minutes here. So alchemy in the West was all about turning baser metals into gold and silver. And it is considered the precursor to modern day chemistry. Chemy is chemistry. So I looked up the etiology of this, and I got to say, it's not an easy etiology. Some said al is means from Arabic, and the chemy part some said it was from Arabic, some said it was from Greek, and then others said it's all Egyptian. So it was really kind of convoluted as to what this word kind of means. But ultimately, today it means it evolved into chemistry from these origins of especially in the West and Western Europe. In China, however, alchemy was primarily a Taoist. And if you're not familiar with Taoism is one of the 3 or 4 main Chinese philosophies. And it was primarily a Taoist adept's pursuit for longevity. So it was about longevity, becoming immortal. And so while medieval Europeans were looking for great wealth by transmuting metal into gold, the Chinese, particularly the Taoists, were seeking to transmute themselves into immortal beings. And so that's it. And if you're a little hung up, by the way, on the way I said one of the 3 or 4 main Chinese philosophies, that would hang me up too if I was listening to this real briefly. The 3 ones we've talked about a lot. There's Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism. But there's a 4th one that some say kind of get up to that same level, but others say it kind of died off and isn't all that useful in studies today. And that was legalism. So that's why I kind of say 3 or 4 main Chinese philosophies. So Taoism, Buddhism, Confucianism, and legalism, which was actually, legalism was probably in the early days of China the most prominent, and then quickly Confucianism over the first few hundred years kind of became dominant. However, so we're talking about Taoist alchemy. There is a schism in Taoist alchemy. Purgadio in 2014 says this broke down into two types of alchemy. There was Waidan, or external alchemy, and Neidan, or internal alchemy. According to him, Waidan predates Neidan and started in the 2nd century BCE. So this is over 2,200 years ago, while Neidan started in 8th century CE, so about 1,200 years old, give or take. I think this may be controversial, as we'll discuss after we introduce each type. So I don't know if I necessarily agree with this interpretation, though the literature probably is in alignment with this, but I think some of the oral traditions are not. So we'll talk about that. So let's talk about Waidan first. Waidan, according to Purgadio, is based on the compounding of elixirs through the manipulation of natural substances, including minerals and metals. Those were actually a really important part of this Waidan approach, and the heating of ingredients in a crucible. Now, these terms we're talking about, you're going to see in some of our quotes, they're actually going to use some of these quotes, these terms. In texts containing recipes, descriptions of ingredients, ritual rules, and passages concerned with the associations of ingredients, instruments, and operations to the Chinese cosmological system. So, again, this is a quote from Purgadio. Many, including the renowned and respected historian of Chinese medicine, Paul Unshold, believes this approach to longevity was an important catalyst for Chinese herbalism. He actually has an interesting theory, and I couldn't quite, because he's a very well-known historian of Chinese medicine, and he's written several books, and I've read quite a few of them, so I'm not sure exactly where this came from, but basically he kind of, in very simple terms, he says Confucianism really much was really contributory to acupuncture, because you look at the meridians and you look at the, when we talk about the organs, we talk about their ministers and the actions that they do. It's very Confucius in their approach, very organized and very hierarchical, like Confucianism is, while Chinese herbalism is not that way at all. And so Unshold really believes that a lot of herbalism is probably from Taoism, Taoist ascetics, living in the mountains, observing nature, seeing animals eat certain herbs and things. And then you bring in this Waidan aspect of the goal of immortality for some Taoist adepts. You bring in a sort of a relatively systemized Taoist approach to using herbs and minerals. And that is the sort of genesis of this heavy research into that. And that extended into herbalism and became herbalism quite a bit. So that's Waidan probably directly contributes to that. In I'm not going to say opposition, but in difference, there's Neidan, and according to Purgadio, Neidan borrows a significant part of its vocabulary and imagery from Waidan, but it aims to produce the elixir within the alchemist's person. In other words, it's not external to the person; it's internal to the person. That's why it's Neidan, or internal alchemy. Its ingredients are the primary components of the cosmos and the human being. Neidan texts cover a wider spectrum of subjects compared to Neidan texts, cover a wider spectrum of subjects compared to Waidan. At its ends, they are on the one hand teachings on the Tao, the principle of the basis of the world as we know it, and on the other, descriptions of self-cultivation practices. So the idea is Neidan says, yeah, you're combining mercury and gold, but these are metaphorical terms for how we're going to meditate or do something internally. And so that's the idea with Neidan. While Waidan, they're specifically talking about mercury and gold. And so how do you ingest those and fuse them into yourself through elixirs and potions and herbal decoctions, preparations, we should probably say in a more general sense. I tend to disagree with these ideas, the separation of Waidan and Neidan, because my teacher Shifu Mike Patterson, he suggested a book to me called The Inner Teachings of Taoism by Po Tuan, and in that book he said, and my teacher said that the ideas of Huaidon, he didn't use these terms Huaidon and Neidon, but he described these different approaches. He said that the ideas of Huaidon were actually a misinterpretation of the Neidon approach, where metaphorical language was taken literally when it was trying to describe how to become immortal through internal practices. In other words, he said this is not from the 8th century CE, like Pragadio says, and the books are from about that time. So I see where Pragadio, I'm not saying he's completely wrong, but he said that there were oral traditions that came along with these practices. And if you just read about Huaidon texts, you wouldn't realize that they're metaphorical languages about what my teacher would say were meditation practices. And so that these internal principles were not written about, but were there from the very beginning. And that's where I kind of suggest that there may not be a difference between the Huaidon and the Neidon. It's a difference of interpretation and application, not necessarily that they were separated in any particular way. And having said this, that this Neidon approach was from the beginning with Huaidon, the book that we're talking that this is based on, the Inner Teachings of Taoism, was actually written in the 11th century CE, so even 300 years later. So it was definitely considered quite a bit later in Taoist philosophy. But again, these ideas were around, these thoughts were around, but my teacher thought they were misinterpreted in the Huaidon approach to things. In this book, The Inner Teachings of Taoism, there's a quote by a commentator of the book, who's Liu Yiming, from 1808 CE, so this is 700 years after the book is written, that supports this view. And the quote is, "Later students did not look into the meanings of the code words and did not figure out the principles of the symbols, seeing talk of gold elixir, lead, mercury, cauldron, and furnace. They thought it referred to the presentation of potions to ingest, and they took to chemistry." So Liu Yiming is basically saying those were incorrect interpretations. So that was very much in line with what my teacher was saying about these concepts. But why are we even talking about Chinese alchemy in today's herb, which is Cinnabar? And that does bring us to today's herb. Zhu Sha, or Cinnabar, is one of the main constituents of Huaidon and Neidon practices and formulas. Of course, in Neidon, it's metaphorical, but in Huaidon, it's actual, it's real Cinnabar. So along with gold, it is considered one of the most pure substances and necessary for longevity practices. In fact, Unshold, that historian, has a quote in his book on medicine in China that says, "Certain substances or precious metals contain the materialized principles of immortality. In the case of gold, for example, recognition of its incorruptibility and permanence may have merged in approaches to immortality." Another substance that attracted early attention was mercuric sulfide, or cinnabar, which in its pure form, due to its insolubility, is the sole non-toxic mercury compound. As we're going to find out if it's toxic or non-toxic as we talk about it today. But this was the quote from Unshold. So the Inner Teachings of Taoism has many quotes involving mercury and cinnabar, and I just have a couple examples here. One is, "Use lead to control mercury. Essence, or jing, light and mercuric, is represented by mercury." So mercury is in this interpretation of the Neidon, is that when they say mercury, what they actually mean is essence, or jing, from a Chinese medical point of view. Here's another quote. There's a whole verse about it. So, "Lead and mercury intermingle. Essence goes to seek sense. Sense comes back to essence. Putting the lead in the mercury, sense returns to essence. Putting the mercury in the lead, essence cleaves to sense. When sense and essence merge without obstruction, there's no worry that the great way, or the Tao, will not be accomplished." And when they say accomplishing the Tao or attaining the Tao, they're actually talking about basically what the Buddhists would say is achieving nirvana, or achieving immortality. So this is what this is talking about. So that's a good quote here. So that's why we're talking, it's hard to talk about cinnabar as an herb without talking about these philosophical aspects of alchemy. So that's where we start today in discussion of our herb. Now, moving on, we do have, I have this cool little book called Chinese Herbal Legends, and it has these for about 50 herbs. So not all the herbs of Chinese, it has these really cool herbal legends that kind of elucidate some of the history and philosophy and uses for some of these herbs. So there is one here. This is an herbal legend about Cinnabar from Zhu Sha. Those were the authors. And so here it is. Here's the quote. Long ago, because people believed in superstitions, when they were ill, they didn't go to see a doctor, but often went to necromancers instead. There was an illness named mania and withdrawal that no doctor could cure. So mania and withdrawal is a current Chinese medical class. It's a thing. It's not exact, but it probably cleaves fairly closely to what we would call bipolar disorder, but not necessarily. There's exceptions and there's some extremes that might fall out of that, but that's really what we're talking about. So there was an illness named mania and withdrawal that no doctor could cure. Strangely, whenever the necromancer treated it, he could cure it. So the people trusted necromancers rather than doctors. There was a man with some knowledge of medicine. He thought that since the necromancers could only draw magic figures, chant incantations, and pretend to be gods and spirits, how could they really cure illness? He guessed that there must be some other reason. So he talked it over with his wife, thought of a plan to discover the necromancer's secret. One day, his wife went to the necromancer and told him that her husband was suffering from mania and withdrawal disease. The necromancer quickly came to their home. There he saw the patient lying on the ground, speaking crazily, and his hair disheveled and a muddy face. "Ah, I am the son of the Jade Emperor," the patient said deliriously. When the necromancer believed that the man was really insane, he burned torches, sprinkled resin, and set up a mahogany stick in his preparations to drive away the ghosts. He placed a bowl of clear water on a table. Then he held up a magic figure and began to recite. "Mysterious heaven, mysterious world," chanted the necromancer. Just as the necromancer was about to burn the magic figure, the man jumped up, grabbed it suddenly, and kicked the necromancer out of the house. "I am the son of the Jade Emperor. How dare you treat me in such an impolite way? Go away, you devil," he shouted. The necromancer was kicked out upon the ground outside the house. When he stood up, the door had already been tightly closed. Although he cried out for a long time, nobody inside listened to him, so he had to go home and accept his bad luck without complaint. Inside the room, the man drank a mouthful of water from the bowl first, but it was tasteless and really a bowl of clear water. Looking at the magic figure, he found nothing strange. "These can't cure illnesses," he thought. At last, he stared at the Zhu Sha that was to be used for painting, but he didn't know if it could cure illness. The next day, he summoned a person who suffered from mania and withdrawal disease to his house and asked him to drink the water with a little Zhu Sha in it. After drinking this, the patient gradually became cured. From that time on, the man knew the necromancer could drive ghosts away and cure insanity only because the Zhu Sha on the magic figure had medical properties. In this way, Zhu Sha became a kind of Chinese medicine. So that's the herbal legend around Cinnabar Zhu Sha. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about what this is. Cinnabar is the primary ore of mercury. Its mineralogical classification is sulfide mineral. Its English translation, Zhu Sha, literally means vermilion or dull red sand. Other names for Zhu Sha include Dan Sha, Chen Sha, Gong Sha, Shui Yin, Ling Sha, which is a synthetic product for external use only, very, very toxic, so only for external. Jiang Mian Sha, we'll talk about what some of these mean as we talk about different preparations. Dobian Sha, Ju Bao Sha, and in Japanese it's Shu Sha, and Korean Jusa. Again, I don't pronounce Japanese or Korean, and I barely pronounce Chinese, so I don't know the exact emphasis as in Japanese and Korean, but those are the words there. So cinnabar as mineral, according to Kim, is a hydrothermal mineral that precipitates from ascending hot waters and vapors as they move through fractured rocks. It forms at shallow depths where temperatures are less than about 200 degrees Celsius. That's double the temperature of boiling water. It usually forms in rocks surrounding geologically recent volcanic activity, but can also form near hot springs and fumaroles. Cinnabar precipitates as coatings on rock surfaces and as fracture fillings. Less often, cinnabar can be deposited in the pore spaces of sediments. So that's cinnabar, what cinnabar actually is from a mineralogical point of view. As an herb, quote unquote herb medicine, a medicinal substance, Bensky places this herb in the substances with unacceptable toxicity subcategory under the obsolete substances category. So basically saying just in the way Bensky and their team place this, they say you shouldn't use it. It's under the obsolete substances category in the subcategory of substances with unacceptable toxicity. So unacceptable toxicity, can't use it. Chen puts it, and originally Bensky put it in some of the earlier versions of their work, put it in the same category as Chen, which is the sedative herbs that calm the Shen or spirit subcategory under the category of Shen calming herbs. So Shen we've mentioned a few times on the show. It means spirit, or as we're going to see, mind spirit sometimes. Brandon Wiseman, our third other big text that we use here, say it is in the heavy settling spirit quieting medicinal subcategory under the category of spirit quieting medicinal. So basically the same as Chen. So according to Bensky, it is sweet, cool, and toxic, and enters the heart channel. Chen says it's actually cold rather than cool. And Brandon Wiseman agrees that it's cold and adds it enters the liver in addition to the heart channel. And the liver is often involved with emotional stuff as well. So that's not a far-fetched addition here. The Divine Farmer's Materia Medica, the Shendong Bensao Jing, which is the first book that we have on individual herbs. And you're going to find this is the first mention of this herb, so it's an old herb. Says it's sweet and slightly cold. So slightly cold, so that can be interpreted as cold or cool in that sort of thing. But sweet is interesting. It's a little bit on the sweet side, and of course they all agree with that. Let's talk a little bit about substances that calm the spirit, so we understand what this category means and how it's actually used traditionally. So the herb is traditionally used as a heavy substance that anchors, settles, and calms the spirit. These substances, according to Bensky and his team, are used primarily for treating disturbances of the spirit, or Shen, also known as consciousness, or Shenjie, which lead to such problems as irritability, insomnia, palpitations, with anxiety, and even some forms of insanity. Because the spirit is said to reside in the heart, many of these substances enter the heart channel. Many also affect the liver, where the ethereal soul Hun is said to reside. Disorders of this organ often manifest in a similar manner. So we haven't really talked about the different types of quote-unquote souls or spirits. That'll make a great something different coming up. But Hun is one of the 5 spirits, and so is Shen. Shen and Hun are 2 of the 5 spirits. One of the more common reasons for a disturbed spirit is Jing, which depending on the context can be translated as fright, shock, sudden anxiety, or jitteriness. So I just want to explain, this is the same Jing as we talk about with essence, but obviously here it doesn't mean essence. That's because in Chinese there's many tone marks, and just having a word without a particular tone mark, it doesn't differentiate that term. So Jing essence probably, I don't know off the top of my head, has a different tone and is therefore a completely different word than this Jing that we're talking about here is fright, shock, sudden anxiety, or jitteriness. Another reason is overwork, which can lead to insufficiency of the nutritive qi and blood. This causes deficiency of the heart and liver, depriving the spirit or ethereal soul of a place where it can peacefully reside. Substances that calm the spirit are generally divided into 2 categories based on their primary function. The first includes those heavy substances that anchor, settle down, and calm the spirit. The second encompasses those substances with mild tonifying actions, which are said to nourish the heart and calm the spirit. When treating disturbances of the spirit, it is important to directly address the underlying cause. This involves not only choosing spirit calming substances which work through different pathological mechanisms, but also strategies that directly affect the causal mechanism. For example, clearing heat from the heart, draining heat from the liver, relieving liver constraint, transforming phlegm, invigorating blood and dispelling blood stasis, calming the liver and extinguishing wind, and opening the orifices. Only a judicious combination of substances that takes into account the etiology of the problem will bring optimal results. From this perspective, substances which calm the spirit can be viewed primarily as treating the manifestations of a disorder. To be effective, they should therefore generally be combined with substances that treat the root cause. So we often talk about root and branch treatment. So a branch treatment is dealing with manifestations or signs and symptoms of a particular disorder, while treating the root means we're actually treating the cause of that. These substances treat the branch. And so that's important for us to know moving into these concepts. All right, so back to our Zhu Sha Cinnabar. Bensky says the dosage of this is 0.1 to 1.5 grams in pills, powders, or chased with a strained, cooled decoction. That's important. We'll talk about that in a minute. Chen Chen say 0.3 to 1 grams taken in pill form only. Brandon Wiseman say 0.1 to 0.5 gram dosage as a powder in pills or drenched, quote unquote drenched, with some sources saying up to 1 gram can be used. I'm not sure what this word drenched means. They didn't explain it in the book, but I wanted to keep it in. My guess is it means like in a decoction or something along those lines. Bensky and his team in Chen Chen agree the original source for this herb is the Shennan Ben Sao Jing, or the Divine Husbandman's Classic of the Materia Medica. That, like I said, is the earliest existing text on individual herbs. So being written in there means it's amongst the oldest herbs around. And that was written in the 2nd century CE. Good quality of this herb, according to Bensky and his team, is bright red, shiny, clean, brittle, and translucent to transparent. They also say the best quality comes from Fujian and Hebei provinces. Zhao and Chen, which is another great text, and it's about Chinese medicinal identification. So this is more about talking about how do you find the best, and it has beautiful pictures. It does have a little bit, as we're going to find out, of the functions, but it's mostly about how do you find the best quality. And they say the best quality is fresh red in color and is lustrous, heavy, and brittle. It has red to brownish red streak marks. It has a faint odor, not much, and is tasteless. So they taste it, which we're going to find out may not be the smartest thing to do, but they do talk about taste in that book quite a bit. Which all told sight, odor, taste, those are all called organoleptic approaches to identification. So what are its actions? According to Bensky, Zhu Sha sedates the heart and calms the spirits. That's very much in line with what we've been talking about. It expels phlegm and sedates jitteriness and convulsions while stopping tremors. And it clears heat, resolves toxicity, and prevents putrefaction. For this, often it's applied topically for things such as carbuncles, mouth sores, sore throat, and snake bite. There's a patent medicine that's called Yoshenwan, which is 6 spirits pill. And it's really tiny, and it's all the substances are toxic, and I think mercury is one of those substances in there. And it's good for sore throats. I shouldn't leave that out. Brandon Wiseman, for its function, says it settles fright and quiets the spirit. And this includes the following conditions: exuberant fire giving rise to vexation, agitation, and insomnia; child fright wind with vigorous heat effusion, convulsions, and arched back rigidity, which technical term for that is ophiothenosis. And if you've ever seen it, it's a scary sight in a child. Phlegm, heat, internal block manifesting in mania and withdrawal, spirit, mind abstraction or absent-mindedness or agitation, or heart palpitations, fearful throbbing, vacuity, vexation, insomnia, and finally epilepsy patterns. This can be used in epilepsy. Its second action is clears heat and resolves toxins, and this can include painful swollen throat, pain and swelling of the gums and mouth and tongue sores, swelling and toxin of red hot painful sores, and enduring ulcerated sores and welling abscesses that fail to close. So that's Brandon Wiseman. Chen and Chen have similar actions. It says they say it sedates the heart and calms the Shen or spirit, and it clears heat and toxins. And Zhao and Chen, which is that identification textbook, says it clears the heart, settles fright, calms the spirit, and resolves toxin. So it's a toxin, but it says it resolves toxin. And there's a saying in Chinese medicine, treat toxin with toxin. So it kind of makes sense in that context. And finally, the Defined Farmers Materia Medica, or the Shendong Ben Sao Jing, says it is a superior jade or stone, and it treats hundreds of diseases of the five viscera and the body. It nourishes the essence spirit, quiets the ethereal and corporeal souls. The corporeal souls is another one of those spirits. Boosts the chi. I should say boosts the chi. Brightens the eyes and kills spirit demons and evil malign ghosts. Remember when this was written, there was a school of at the medical school, there was a department of magic and incantations. So spirit demons and ghosts were definitely part of medicine at the time that this book was written. And it also says protracted taking may enable one to communicate with spirit light and prevent senility. So spirit light is ghosts and things along those lines. So there's definitely a very spiritual aspect to the Divine Farmers Materia Medica and to this herb. So preparations, Bensky actually talks a lot about preparations here, and they say because Chen Prefecture in modern-day Hunan province was especially well known as a source of production from the time of the Inner Classic to this day, it is commonly referred to as Chen Sand or Chen Sha. So the Inner Classic refers to the Wangdi Neijing, which is the Yellow Emperor's Inner Classic, which was compiled around 200 BCE. So we're talking about 400 years before the Shenang Ben Saojing. In the process of separating the cinnabar from its matrix of stone, the small chunks of cinnabar are split off, so it is known as cloven sand or pisha. These particles are fresh red in color and semi-transparent, and because they are shining like a mirror, they are known as mirror-face sand or Jingmian Sha, and brilliant clear sand or Guangming Sha. In the past, exceptionally high-quality cinnabar was presented as tribute to the imperial court for use in longevity medicinals. Thus, the term tribute cinnabar or Gongzhu Sha is specified by those wishing to emphasize the best quality. And then we have a preparation called floating cinnabar, shui fei zhu sha. Aqueous trituration is the process of using water and reducing a substance to an extremely fine powder. In the case of cinnabar, the process is to place the mineral in an appropriate grinding vessel, add water, and grind the mineral into a paste. A large volume of water is added, and the mixture is then stirred to form a suspension. A magnet is used to remove iron particles. The material that becomes suspended in the water is immediately poured off and retained, while the coarser material sinks to the bottom. The sediment is further ground, water is added, and the process is repeated until fine mud is obtained with no remaining shining particles. The sediments which are incapable of suspension are discarded. The products of the pouring off are combined and allowed to settle. The water again poured off, and the powder is then dried in the sun. Aqueous trituration reduces the content of soluble mercuric salts. The more often the process is repeated, the less the content. Because the water and gastric acid soluble mercury salts contained in impure cinnabar are responsible for its toxicity, the cleaner it is, the less toxic it will be. However, completely pure cinnabar or mercuric sulfide, when heated in the presence of oxygen, turns into mercury oxide or HGO, which is soluble in diluted acids such as gastric acid and is toxic. Don't heat it. So Western uses of this herb. It's not really a Western herbal medicine. Cinnabar is used in Ayurvedic medicine, however. And in the past, cinnabar was used as a pigment in Europe. If you've not heard, and I quote in the end, we haven't talked about Mad Hatter's disease, but it was used as a pigment, especially in felt and in working with felt. And so hatters would use cinnabar quite a bit. And of course, they would get toxic symptoms, and that was Mad Hatter's disease, if you've ever heard of that. So we did talk about it. So my last slide is going to be off. That's okay. So it was used as a pigment in Europe and as a medicinal to treat inflammation of the nose and throat, corneal stains, syphilis. Up until the last century, it was used for syphilis, ulcers and warts, and as a laxative. Having said this, is no longer used in modern Western medicine or herbology. Neither the PDR for herbal medicines or physician's drug reference for herbal medicines or the American Herbal Product Association Botanical Safety Handbook have an entry for this quote-unquote herb. So not used in modern herbology in the West at all. So moving on from the Western, let's talk about commentary on this herb. Bensky actually has quite a bit of commentary on this, Bensky and their team. Cinnabar or Zhu Sha is sweet, cold, and heavy in weight. Its coldness directs fire downward. Heaviness suppresses trepidation in the oft-quoted words of the 6th century physician Zhu Sha, and its crimson color signals that it enters the heart channel. Thus, it clears fire, sedates the heart, arrests jitteriness and anxiety, and quiets the spirit. Because the heart governs the spirit and resolve, which reside in the heart, suppression of fire restores calm to the heart. Cinnabar Zhu Sha has therefore been used as an important medicinal for irritability, restless insomnia, withdrawal mania, and childhood convulsions. Applied topically, it treats toxic sores and carbuncles, breaks up mobile and fixed abdominal masses, and is an antidote for toxins due to bites from poisonous animals and insects. Commentary on the Divine Husband's classic Materia Medica states that it is a medicinal that cools and sedates the princely fire of the lesser yin. It quiets and settles the consciousness so that the essence and spirit are secured. When fire no longer blazes exuberantly, metal and wood become calm so that the ethereal soul and the corporeal soul can settle down. So metal and wood, in this case, is really talking about the heart and liver. The strength of qi naturally doubles. The Divine Husband's classic Materia Medica observes that Cinnabar Zhu Sha is sweet, slightly cold, governs all the illnesses of the body's 5 yin organs, nourishes consciousness, quiets the ethereal soul and the corporeal soul, augments the qi, and brightens the eyes. So we kind of already mentioned that earlier. In Rectification of the Meaning of Materia Medica, Zhang Jie Bin elaborates on these attributes. It enters the heart to quiet the spirit and travel through the blood vessels. It enters the lungs to direct qi downward and travel through the skin. It enters the spleen to drive out phlegm and drool and travel through the flesh and muscles. It enters the liver to promote the movement of static blood, travel through the sinews and membranes. It enters the kidneys to drive out pathogenic water and travel through the bones and marrow. Whether in the upper, continuing with the same book, whether in the upper or lower body, there's no place it does not reach. Thus, it can sedate the heart, drive out phlegm, expel pathogens, direct fire downward, treat childhood convulsions, kill poisons from bites, eliminate noxious attacks, i.e. seizures from unknown causes such as demonic possession, sores, scabies, and tinea. However, while its form is heavy, its nature is racing. It excels at moving and directing downward with unpredictable changes. Use it to treat excess patterns. This is its forte. So that's the Bensky commentary. Chen and Brennan and Wiseman also have a little bit of commentary on this. Chen says, Zhu Sha is sometimes used to coat tablets and pills. It has tranquilizing functions to calm the Shen spirit. It also seals the pills against moisture to prolong shelf life. So there's some practical reasons for that. Brandon Wiseman say Zhu Sha is also used to process other medicinals to increase their spirit quieting action. So often combined for that reason. It calms the spirit. Comparison. So Bensky compares this herb with Coptis rhizoma or Huang Lian. Both substances cool heart fire and quiet the spirit and resolve. Zhu Sha, however, is also heavy and expels phlegm and is therefore the better choice for treating withdrawal mania due to phlegm fire. On the other hand, Huanglian, while less able to calm the spirit, is better at draining fire, clearing heat, and cooling the blood, is more often used for restlessness, irritability, delirium, and bleeding due to heat entering the nutritive level in febrile diseases. Again, both substances resolve toxicity, but Zhu Sha is only used externally for this purpose, while Huanglian is both taken internally and applied topically. Moreover, Huanglian dries dampness and is therefore used for dysenteric disorders, focal distension, nausea, and vomiting associated with patterns of damp heat. So that's that comparison. Bensky also has one single combination that it talks about with magnetitum or Zhu Sha. Zhu Sha is sweet, slightly cold and red in color, travels through the blood vessels, and excels at sedating the heart and calming the spirit. Zhu Sha is acrid or spicy, salty and cold, and enters the liver and kidney channels to augment the kidneys while calming the liver, thereby settling the mind and quieting the spirit. Together, the two substances are mutually complementary, providing a strong sedating and calming combination that not only contains the floating yang and prevents the heart fire from harassing upward, it also augments the yin and thereby reestablishes to a certain extent harmonious communication between the heart and the kidneys. The Golden Mirror of medical tradition elaborates, still talking about this combination. Zhu Sha is endowed with the red color of the south, entering and unblocking the heart, directing rootless fire downward to calm the mind. Zhu Sha is endowed with the black color of the north, entering and unblocking the kidneys, drawing in lung metal qi to generate essence, weighing down upward blazing fire in order to settle the mind. Both minerals are heavy and primarily direct downward, are cold so they cool the yin, are similar in purpose and pathway, and together produce an effect that is immediately perceptible. Now, I have a quick question here. So Cinnabar, as per its description, is the same as the mineral stone. Yes, it really is. Has anyone seen or used it as a medicinal herb? Yes, I have. Like I said, not often, and we're going to talk about that. So hang on to that a little bit more. I have seen it used as a medicinal herb. I have seen it in patent medications. I've taken it as a medicinal herb. I will not be doing that again. So we'll talk about that as we go along. So thank you for asking that. So its contents as processed, Zhu Sha really only has one constituent, or should only have one constituent, which is mercury sulfide. And the science about this mineral is that it is toxic and does not have any medicinal properties at all. So that is the contents of this. So that's kind of where we do. From a Western point of view, this stuff is bad. From a Chinese point of view, we're going to talk about the science here in just a minute, but there's usefulness medicinally in this, but it is toxic. So we'll talk about that toxicity here. So the science on this herb is tough. So there are lots of studies, but most are looking at the toxicity of this mineral, which we summarize under concerns in just a few minutes. A few try to show it is an important ingredient to some key formulas and therefore could not be omitted. None of these, while often supporting this position, showed strong evidence to support its usage, as most were animal studies. So, there are a lot of Chinese studies that said, hey, this is something we need. It's an important part of these herbal formulas. And it would sometimes talk about a specific herbal formula as the paper, sometimes just in general terms. But all of those studies, when they looked at it, were rat studies for the most part. There were maybe a few other animals, but rat studies and nothing really human to say that this is safe. In fact, if you look at the science, it is definitely not safe. So just to explain one of these, one interesting and recent rat study in 2022 compared the same herbal formula, one with Zhu Sha and one without. So it's the exact same formula, but one had Cinnabar in it and one did not have Cinnabar in it. And they concluded our study indicated that the analgesic and fracture healing promotion effects of the Cinnabar formula were significantly stronger than those of the non-Cinnabar formula. According to the hot water tail flick test and blood calcium and blood phosphorus levels of the rats. Cinnabar also appears to reduce the toxicity of semen strychnine in rats and is thus potentially safe and effective when used according to TCM or traditional Chinese medical principles. While this does support the use of Cinnabar, this is my quote. Now that's the end of their conclusion, and this is my interpretation. While this does support the use of Cinnabar, It is a rat study and therefore poor evidence for human use. Also, when I looked at the results, it seemed the Cinnabar list, the formula without Cinnabar, was still quite effective at these things. It was just not as effective as that containing Cinnabar. So I kind of draw the opposite conclusion from what they did, which is, okay, Cinnabar was more effective than the same formula without Cinnabar, but the formula without Cinnabar still had positive effects, quite good positive effects. So for me, it may not be as strong a formula without the Cinnabar, but it was still a useful formula. And so I kind of almost came away with the exact opposite sense from that particular study than the conclusion. But then again, I didn't do it, so I'm just reading it. So we always talk about drug-herb interactions of these herbs. I did do a search on interactions of cytochrome P450 and P-glycoprotein and other transporter proteins, which are, those are usual markers when we see there's drug-herb interactions. There are other forms of drug-herb interactions, but these are the ones that there's commonly studies on. And there really weren't any specific interactions with Cinnabar that I came up with. However, I did see one paper from 2016 showing a rat study that said there were no interactions of mercury sulfide with cytochrome P450 or transporter proteins, though interestingly, other forms of mercury such as methylmercury and mercury chloride did show various interactions with cytochrome P450 and P-glycoprotein. So at this point, I don't think there's evidence that there's actually any drug-herb interactions. As we're going to talk about it, for me, that probably isn't super useful because I'm not going to use it as an herb. But I'm spoiling this. I'm spoiling the conclusion in the middle here. But there we go. So concerns. This is the big issue with this. And the major concern with this herb is its toxicity. Most developed countries either ban it or have serious concerns about it and generally ban prepared medicines with it. Bensky and their team say it should not be used in large amounts for long term. To prevent mercury poisoning, do not heat it. That's really important. They also discuss some traditional contraindications. From the thoroughly revised Materia Medica, it says, used by itself or to excess, it will make people slow-witted and dejected. And from harm and benefit in the Materia Medica, they say it sedates and nourishes the heart spirit, but should be used unprepared. If refined with fire, is toxic, and taking it has often been fatal. They continue with a good size section on its toxicity. Cinnabar is toxic and in many countries is contraindicated for oral administration due to its mercury content. Oral administration in high doses or long-term can cause mercury poisoning. The toxic dose is about 1 to 1.5 grams daily for 30 days as a drug powder, or 6 to 7 grams daily over a period of 70 to 80 days. I don't understand what a drug powder is compared to what the 6 to 7 grams daily. I guess that's the raw herb, 6 to 7 grams daily over a period of 70 days. I'm not sure what that refers to. Symptoms of chronic mercury poisoning are restlessness, a metallic taste in the mouth, profuse salivation, congestion and ulceration of the oral mucosa, swollen, painful, and bleeding gingiva, anorexia or loss of appetite, nausea, vomiting. Painful and bleeding gingiva are the gums, by the way. Nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, diarrhea, muscle tremors, impaired sexual function, albuminuria, so that's albumin in the urine, hematuria, which is blood in the urine, and cylindruria, which is renal casts, which are cylindrical cigar-shaped structures produced by the kidney in the urine as well. So that's not a good thing. And you can see that if you've ever done a urine sample, if you hold it up, if these casts are there, you can see them kind of floating or settling in the bottom of the cup. So they're observable to the naked eye. Continuing their concerns, according to Chinese sources, overdosage and long-term administration must be strictly avoided. Only the natural raw mineral cleaned by grinding and floating, shui fei, can be taken internally. The use of heat in processing must be strictly avoided as it creates mercury oxide, which is highly toxic. In addition, contact with aluminum vessels during the grinding process must be avoided. The synthetic product Zhu Sha is more toxic than the natural product and is only for external use. Chen has similar concerns, saying, to prevent cumulative toxicity, Zhu Sha should not be used at a large dosage or for a long period of time. Zhu Sha should be used with extreme caution for those with compromised liver and kidney functions. Do not process Zhu Sha with heat, as this increases the risk of mercury poisoning. So again, we're hearing again and again, don't use heat, don't use heat. They continue to say, acute overdose of Zhu Sha is characterized by disturbance of the central nervous system with nervousness, a metallic taste in the mouth, swollen gums, poor appetite, abdominal pain, diarrhea, tremor, sexual dysfunction, and liver and kidney damage. So very similar to what we just read from Bensky. They also have some suggestions for overdosage in terms of how you could deal with overdosage using some herbal products. It was a little bit long and I don't think incredibly useful, so I didn't include it here. But finally, they state, excuse me, Zhu Sha is rarely used as a medicinal substance now. This discussion here is included primarily for academic purposes to reflect the historical use of this substance. So this is important. They're concluding it should not be used. Interestingly, Western culture also used mercury in the past for treatment of syphilis. So yeah, it was standard treatment for syphilis in the early 1900s. So absolutely. And finally, Brandon Wiseman essentially agreed with these concerns. They said exactly the same thing, maybe with slightly different language, but was definitely in the ballpark of all this. So that is our herb Zhu Sha. So interesting. I'm, again, completely fascinated with this herb historically, philosophically, and even medicinally, because it was used medicinally. And let's face it, if you're using it for syphilis or something in the early 1900s, where it is toxic, but it is helping the syphilis, you were going to die from the syphilis, and there was not a lot else you could do for syphilis than using mercury, and you would die from it a lot sooner than the toxicity would do you in. So, I wonder if it wasn't a bad choice at that point. But as soon as antibiotics came in that could treat syphilis, then obviously that's the way better choice here. So today we started our podcast with a discussion of Taoist alchemy and longevity techniques, philosophies, tactics. I don't even know what to say that, and the differences between Huaidon and Neidon, inner and outer alchemy. Then we discussed Zhu Sha, a very storied but toxic ingredient. And we didn't even get into Mad Hatter disease. Well, we did get into Mad Hatter disease. That was, if you've ever heard of that, and if you haven't, that probably means you haven't been to Disneyland, because they have the Mad Hatter, is it the teacups or the cups? And that, it was well known. If you worked on hats for decades, you were going to go crazy. So that's Mad Hatter disease. The bottom line is this mineral appears to have some medicinal benefit, but that benefit is far outweighed by its potential for toxicity and harm. I've studied this herb and its properties, but I was never really sure if I should use it. After all of this, I am still fascinated by it and its historical and philosophical significance, but I will be avoiding it and will not suggest it to my patients. That little Liu Shenwan, it's the coolest little thing. It's like this little beautiful little Chinese urn in plastic, and it's really small, maybe an inch. And it has a little top on it that you twist off opposite what you would normally twist off. So normally we twist off to the lefty loosey. You actually twist it off by turning it to the right. Very strange. And then there's tiny pills. We're used to BB size herbal pills. These are 1/10 that size, if that big, tiny things. And you're supposed to put them out, and you're supposed to take, I think the dosage is like 9 of them or something, and you're supposed to put them on the back of your tongue and let them kind of dissolve and coat the sore throat. And I've used that. I believe mercury is one of the ingredients. There's other toxic ingredients in there as well. I don't use it anymore because I never found it to be incredibly useful, and I have more useful stuff for sore throats. But I'm just saying this because I have done that. The other thing that I've done, which is interesting, was when I first graduated with my bachelor's degree, I was actually hired by someone who, I think they were doing a dissertation, a doctoral dissertation for psychology, and she wanted to talk about mercury fillings and how they could affect psychology. So she hired me to go through the research on mercury and mercury fillings and what are the mercury that are issues. And what I actually came up with is once mercury is kind of set in the mouth, it's probably not that toxic. But as you bite down on it, you release a little mercury gas and you swallow that. When they're being put in, there's some methyl mercury that can be swallowed. Methyl mercury was the bad mercury in that context. And the gas, which we're talking about, some of the things we've talked about, like mercury oxide, things along those lines, are highly toxic. So here's the bottom line for me whenever I'm on the fence of something along these lines is if my patient were to get, first of all, I don't want my patients to get sick. So right there, if I think they might get sick, I'm probably not going to go with it. This is the case here. They might get sick, probably won't go with it. But if I were to give it to a patient, from a medical legal point of view, would they have a case against me? And the answer to that is absolutely. I don't know a developed nation that if a patient got sick from mercury that you had prescribed, even if it was a mistake of the manufacturer, what have you, you prescribed it, and they sued you for malpractice, I think they would win hands down. I don't think you have a defense that is cogent in that context. And so from a medical legal point of view, I just don't think there's any way to defend yourself if you were to actually prescribe this. So for all those reasons, I mean, the big one is that it might harm them, and forget the medical legal reason, it might harm them. So I'm not going to offer this to my patients. Like I said, I've done it myself, and I'm not worried about the tiny amounts that I've had, but probably won't. I haven't used that herb in that formula, that patent medicine in a long time, that prepared medicine. So there you go. That's my summary. That's my conclusion from all of this. So thank you for hanging through that. In our next episode, we will be looking at a Chinese herbal formula, Feng Feng Tang Shen San, or Sapashnikovia powder that sagely unblocks. I love saying Sapashnikovia. So Feng Feng Tang Shen San, or Sapashnikovia powder that sagely unblocks. According to Scheid and his team, which is, again, one of the main textbooks on herbal formulas that we use, Chinese herbal formulas, this formula induces sweating without injuring the exterior and purges without injuring the interior. Its ability to unblock is sage-like in its subtlety, hence the name. Not a formula I commonly use, which makes me all the more eager to find out about it. And as usual, we will be exploring something a little different. Not sure what it's going to be. You're going to have to join us to find out. So please join us for the next interesting episode of Sperb Herbs. Thank you very much. I have a nice little request. If you like this podcast, please do us a humongous favor. Give us a 5-star rating in your favorite podcast app. We're on all of them. We're on Android, whatever it is, the Android store. We're on iPhone, on the podcast app. We're on Spotify, all of the biggies. So any of those that you use, if you give us 5 stars, man, that would make our day, probably make our week, and maybe even our month. So thank you for even considering that. And just as a reminder, you can get this and 30% off our Drug Herb Series, 50% off our Drug Herb Series CUs and NCCOM PDAs at Drug Herb Series Continuing Education Units and National Certification Commission of Acupuncture and Oriental Medicine professional development activities at www.integrativemedicinecouncil.org. And that's council, COUNCIL, integrativemedicinecouncil.org. And you can always get in touch with me at Dr. Greg at spurbsherbs.com or at our website, www.spurbsherbs.com. That's SPERBSHERBS.com. So again, thank you very much for hanging in there. We did perfect time at 1 hour. And here is our bibliography. As usual, have a nice extensive bibliography. Thank you very much.
Sperb Herbs.
The proceeding was presented by Dr. Greg Sperber. We would like to thank Janelle for all her support and everybody else who contributed to this program.
Janelle.
Timothy
Thompson.
Dobbins.
Rogers.
Campbell.